From a staged brawl at the Cannes Film Festival that fooled the entire world to a script originally written for a comic book cyborg, Roland Emmerich's cybernetic soldier spectacle harbors some truly bizarre secrets. Did you know the film's Vietnam was actually filmed on an Arizona golf course, or that 400 kilograms of ice came from a single 7-Eleven store? With rejected Deathlok scripts, self-generating crystal armor concepts, and Arnold Schwarzenegger making surprise set visits, this action flick's production was stranger than fiction. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Universal Soldier, 1992. Fact 1. Fake Cannes Festival Brawl. The infamous brawl between Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren at the 1992 Cannes Film Festival was one of the most talked-about incidents in the festival's history, but it turns out the entire confrontation was nothing more than an elaborate publicity stunt designed to generate buzz for Universal Soldier. The incident occurred just outside the festival hall as both actors were attending to promote their upcoming film. Witnesses watched in shock as Van Damme and Lundgren appeared to get into a heated argument that quickly escalated into physical pushing and shoving. Security guards had to rush in to separate the two muscular action stars before the situation got completely out of hand, and the dramatic confrontation was captured by television cameras and photographers from around the world. News outlets immediately picked up the story, with many reporting it as a genuine feud between the two co-stars. The footage spread across international media, with entertainment shows and news programs discussing the apparent bad blood between the Belgian martial artist and the Swedish action hero. For years, fans and industry insiders speculated about what could have caused such animosity between the two actors who were supposed to be promoting their movie together. However, the truth didn't come out until much later, when Dolph Lundgren revealed in an interview that the entire altercation had been carefully planned and choreographed as a marketing strategy. Lundgren confirmed on his official website that both he and Van Damme had agreed to stage the fight to create publicity for Universal Soldier, knowing that any controversy would draw more attention to their film. Van Damme later backed up Lundgren's confession during a 2018 podcast appearance, admitting that they had deliberately orchestrated the whole incident. The two actors had actually gotten along well during filming and remained on friendly terms throughout the production, making their ability to convincingly fake a public feud all the more impressive. The stunt worked exactly as intended, generating countless headlines and keeping Universal Soldier in the entertainment news cycle leading up to its theatrical release. The fake Cannes brawl became one of the most successful publicity stunts in action movie history, proving that sometimes the best way to promote a film about soldiers is to stage your own mock battle. Fact 2. 7. 11 Ice Supply Miracle. When the Universal Soldier production team needed massive amounts of ice for filming their sci-fi action movie, they found an unlikely hero in the form of a single convenience store manager in Arizona who went above and beyond to meet their unusual demands. The film's plot required the Universal Soldiers to be kept constantly cooled to prevent their enhanced bodies from overheating, which meant the production needed enormous quantities of ice for various scenes throughout the shoot. Rather than sourcing ice from multiple suppliers or industrial facilities, the crew discovered that nearly all 400 kilograms of ice they needed could be obtained from just one local 7-Eleven store in Arizona. The store manager, whose name was Joaquim Alvarez, found himself dealing with ice orders unlike anything he had ever experienced in his retail career. Day after day, the movie production would arrive to purchase massive amounts of ice, far exceeding what any normal customer would ever need. Alvarez worked tirelessly to keep up with the demand, constantly restocking his ice supplies and coordinating deliveries to ensure the film crew never ran short of their essential cooling material. What makes this story even more remarkable is how Alvarez's dedication to serving the Universal Soldier production caught the attention of his suppliers. The Nugget Ice Corporation, which provided ice to the 7-Eleven store, was so impressed by the dramatic spike in sales figures from Alvarez's location that they decided to recognize his exceptional performance in a very special way. The ice company executives were so amazed by the sales numbers coming from this single Arizona 7-Eleven that they invited Joaquim Alvarez to take a personal tour of their ice manufacturing facility. This behind-the-scenes look at how ice was produced and distributed was their way of acknowledging how his store had become their most successful retail partner during the filming period. The situation perfectly demonstrates how movie productions can have unexpected impacts on local businesses, turning an ordinary convenience store manager into an unofficial hero of Hollywood logistics. Alvarez's willingness to handle the unusual demands of a major film production helped ensure that Universal Soldier could maintain its cool aesthetic throughout filming. Fact 3. Golf Course Vietnam War. The opening Vietnam War sequence in Universal Soldier looks incredibly authentic and convincing on screen, but audiences would be shocked to learn that these supposedly jungle warfare scenes were actually filmed on a perfectly manicured golf course in the desert town of Kingman, Arizona. Universal Soldier begins with a flashback to 1969 Vietnam, where soldiers Luke Devereaux and Andrew Scott engage in their fatal confrontation that sets up the entire plot of the movie. These scenes needed to look like genuine Southeast Asian jungle warfare, complete with dense vegetation, tropical conditions, and the authentic atmosphere of the Vietnam conflict that would make viewers believe they were watching real combat footage from the war. However, the production team faced the obvious challenge that they were filming in Arizona, which looks nothing like the humid jungles of Vietnam. Rather than traveling to an actual tropical location or building elaborate jungle sets in a studio, the filmmakers came up with a creative and cost-effective solution that involved transforming a local golf course into a convincing war zone. The art department worked extensively to dress the Kingman golf course with artificial jungle foliage, fake plants, and tropical set decorations that would completely hide the fact that they were filming on what was normally a recreational facility for golfers. They strategically placed fake trees, bushes, and vegetation throughout the course to create the illusion of dense jungle terrain, while carefully positioning cameras to avoid showing any telltale signs of the golf course's true nature. The transformation was so successful that even viewers who know this secret have difficulty spotting the golf course elements when watching the finished film. The production team managed to create such a convincing jungle environment that the Vietnam scenes feel completely authentic, with no obvious indicators that the actors were actually running around on fairways and greens rather than through actual Southeast Asian wilderness. This clever use of location filming demonstrates how creative production teams can transform ordinary American locations into exotic international settings through the skillful application of set decoration and camera work, proving that movie magic often happens in the most unexpected places. Fact 4. Originally a Deathlok script, the script that eventually became Universal Soldier had a completely different origin story than most viewers would ever imagine, as it started life as a rejected screenplay for a comic book adaptation that never made it to the big screen. Before Universal Soldier existed, Hollywood was attempting to bring the Marvel Comics character Deathlok to movie theaters through a live-action film adaptation. Deathlok was a cyborg character from the comics who had been a soldier killed in action and then brought back to life as a cybernetic warrior with enhanced abilities and programming that sometimes conflicted with his remaining human consciousness. The similarities between the Deathlok comic book character and what would eventually become the Universal Soldiers are striking when you consider the core concept of dead soldiers being resurrected as enhanced fighting machines who struggle with their lost humanity. Both stories feature military personnel who die in combat, get transformed into superhuman warriors through advanced technology, and then have to deal with the psychological consequences of their transformation. However, the Deathlok movie project never moved forward into production, leaving the studio with a completed screenplay that they had already invested time and money into developing. Rather than simply shelving the script entirely, the writers and producers decided to rework the material by removing the specific Deathlok character elements and comic book references while keeping the basic premise of reanimated soldiers. This process of repurposing the rejected Deathlok script explains why Universal Soldier feels so much like a comic book movie, even though it was presented as an original science fiction concept. The core DNA of the story remained essentially the same, with dead soldiers being brought back as enhanced warriors, but the specific Marvel Comics connections were stripped away to create something that could stand on its own. The transformation from comic book adaptation to original screenplay demonstrates how Hollywood projects can evolve and change during the development process, with rejected material sometimes finding new life in completely different forms that audiences never suspect had previous incarnations in other genres or franchises. Fact 5. Crystal Knights. Working title. The movie that audiences know as Universal Soldier was originally going to be called Crystal Knights, and this early title reveals just how dramatically different the film's concept was during its initial development stages. The Crystal Knights name wasn't just a random working title, but actually described a completely different set of abilities that the resurrected soldiers were supposed to possess in the original screenplay. According to writer Chris Leach, who worked on the early versions of the script. The soldiers in this version had what he called a bio-armor concept that was far more fantastical than what eventually made it to the screen. In the Crystal Knights version of the story, the enhanced soldiers had self-generating armor capabilities that would activate automatically whenever they sensed danger or threat. Their adrenal glands would kick into high gear during combat situations, producing a special type of sweat that would harden into diamond-hard body armor covering their entire bodies. This crystalline armor wasn't just regular protection, but had the appearance of many faceted diamonds that would form a crystal-like covering over the soldiers' skin, making them look like living gemstone warriors. The visual effect would have been striking, with the soldiers literally transforming into sparkling, diamond-covered fighters whenever they entered battle mode. However, this ambitious concept ran into serious practical problems during the development process. The technology needed to create convincing computer-generated imagery of crystal armor forming and disappearing on actors' bodies was simply too expensive and technically challenging for the film's budget and the available special effects technology of the early 1990s. As Chris Leitch explained in later interviews, the Crystal Knights concept was abandoned because no one had the computer graphics technology to pull off this effect within the movie's financial constraints. The production team realized they needed to find a more practical and achievable way to show the soldiers' enhanced abilities, which led to the simpler approach of enhanced strength, healing, and endurance that audiences see in the final version of Universal Soldier. Fact 6. Last cinema digital sound film. Universal Soldier holds the unique distinction of being the final movie ever released with cinema digital sound, a groundbreaking but ultimately doomed audio format that represented one of Hollywood's earliest attempts at digital theater sound. Cinema digital sound, known by its initials CDS, was developed by Eastman Kodak and Optical Radiation Corporation in the early 1990s as the film industry's first digital sound format for theatrical releases. The system was designed to replace traditional analog audio tracks on both 35mm and 70mm film prints with discrete 5.1 digital audio that could deliver much clearer and more immersive sound experiences to movie audiences. The CDS format used 16-bit audio with delta modulation compression that achieved a 4:1 compression ratio, and the digital information was printed directly onto the film itself, similar to how later formats like Dolby Digital and Sony Dynamic Digital Sound would work. The first movie to use this revolutionary technology was Dick Tracy in 1990. And only 10 films in total were ever released with CDS encoding during its brief existence. However, cinema digital sound had a critical flaw that would ultimately lead to its downfall and explain why Universal Soldier became its final chapter. Unlike other digital sound formats that would come later, CDS had no analog backup system built into the film prints, which meant that if the digital information became damaged or corrupted in any way, theaters would experience complete silence during the movie. This lack of a safety net made CDS extremely risky for theater operators, because damaged prints could result in audiences sitting through portions of movies with absolutely no sound whatsoever. Other digital formats learned from this mistake and always included analog backup tracks that would automatically kick in if the digital audio failed, but CDS prints were completely dependent on their digital information remaining intact. The combination of this major technical weakness, along with other limitations and the high costs associated with the format, caused cinema digital sound to disappear from the market almost as quickly as it had arrived, making Universal Soldier an accidental piece of movie theater technology history. Fact 7. Arnold's surprise set visit. Arnold Schwarzenegger made an unexpected appearance on the Universal Soldier, set at the Hoover Dam in mid-October 1991, arriving in style aboard Tom Cruise's private jet to check out what his potential competition was up to in the action movie world. At the time of filming, Arnold was already established as one of Hollywood's biggest action stars, having dominated the genre throughout the 1980s with movies like The Terminator, Predator, and Total Recall. However, Jean-Claude Van Damme was rapidly rising as a serious contender in the action movie market, and Arnold was apparently curious enough about this Belgian martial artist's latest project to make a personal visit to see what all the fuss was about. The circumstances of Arnold's arrival were almost as interesting as the visit itself, since his own private jet was being serviced by engineers at the time and was unavailable for use. Tom Cruise generously offered to let Arnold borrow his personal aircraft for the trip, demonstrating the kind of mutual support that existed among Hollywood's elite action stars during this era. When Arnold arrived at the Hoover Dam location, Van Damme greeted him warmly and took him on a complete tour of the set, showing off the elaborate production that was bringing Universal Soldier to life. The two action stars spent time examining the props, equipment, and staging areas that were being used to create the high-tech military thriller, with Arnold getting an up-close look at how his competition was approaching the science fiction action genre. After the set tour concluded, Van Damme invited Arnold back to his private trailer, where they shared a meal together consisting of chicken breast with pasta, followed by cigars for everyone present. This friendly lunch meeting gave Arnold the opportunity to get a personal sense of Van Damme as both a performer and a rival, while also allowing him to assess the scale and quality of the Universal Soldier production. The visit represented a fascinating moment when the established king of action movies took time to personally evaluate one of his most promising challengers, suggesting that Arnold was taking Van Damme's rising career seriously enough to warrant hands-on reconnaissance. Fact 8. Truck versus plane physics fail. One of Universal Soldier's most impressive visual effects was actually achieved through clever camera angles and editing rather than advanced technology, as the massive Unisol command truck could never have realistically fit inside the cargo plane that appears to transport it in the movie. The film features several scenes where the high-tech mobile command center, which serves as the operations base for the Universal Soldier program, appears to be loaded into and transported by a large military cargo aircraft. This enormous truck contains all the sophisticated equipment needed to monitor and control the Unisols during their missions, including computer systems, medical facilities, and weapons storage, making it a crucial piece of military hardware in the story. However, the reality of filming these sequences was far more complicated than what audiences see on screen, because the production team discovered that the physics and logistics of actually putting this truck inside a plane simply wouldn't work. The massive command vehicle was so large that only the front cab portion could physically fit through the cargo doors and into the interior space of the aircraft they were using for filming. Even if the entire truck could have somehow been squeezed into the plane's cargo hold, there was an even bigger problem waiting for the production team. The combined weight of the fully loaded command truck would have been far too heavy for the aircraft to actually take off and fly, making the entire concept physically impossible from an aviation standpoint. The filmmakers solved this challenge by using creative camera work and editing techniques that made it appear as though the complete truck was being transported by air. They filmed the cab portion actually being loaded into the plane, then used careful angles and cuts to suggest that the entire vehicle was inside, when in reality most of the truck remained on the ground throughout the supposed flight sequences. This behind-the-scenes revelation demonstrates how movie magic often involves working around real-world limitations through clever filmmaking techniques rather than simply building bigger sets or using more powerful equipment. The convincing illusion that the truck could be airlifted was created entirely through the art of cinema rather than actual transportation capabilities. Fact 9. Real traffic jam created. The long line of cars waiting to cross the Hoover Dam that appears in Universal Soldier wasn't created by the art department or filled with hired extras, but was actually a genuine traffic jam caused by the movie production's own filming activities at this popular tourist destination. The Hoover Dam sequence is one of the most important action scenes in Universal Soldier, as it serves as the first major deployment of the Unisol team and demonstrates their enhanced abilities to audiences. The scene involves the Universal Soldiers being called in to handle a terrorist hostage situation at the dam, which required the production to set up extensive equipment, cameras, and crew members throughout the area to capture all the necessary footage. However, the Hoover Dam is not just a movie location but also a functioning piece of infrastructure that thousands of real tourists and commuters use every day to travel between Arizona and Nevada. The dam's roadway serves as an important crossing point over the Colorado River, and any disruption to normal traffic flow can quickly create significant backups of vehicles. When the Universal Soldier crew arrived to film their elaborate action sequence, they needed to control large portions of the dam area for safety reasons and to maintain the proper cinematic environment for their shots. This meant temporarily blocking or redirecting normal vehicle traffic, which created exactly the kind of congestion that the script called for in the terrorist scenario. Rather than hiring dozens of extra vehicles and drivers to create the appearance of a traffic jam, the filmmakers discovered that their own production activities were generating a perfectly authentic line of frustrated motorists who were simply trying to get across the dam during their normal daily routines. The real cars with real drivers stuck in real traffic provided a much more convincing and natural-looking backdrop than any artificially created scene could have achieved. This happy accident of logistics meant that the production got the realistic traffic jam they needed for the story, while actual commuters and tourists found themselves inadvertently becoming unpaid background actors in a major Hollywood action movie, creating an unusual situation where real life and movie fiction merged together seamlessly. Fact 10. Multinational American soldiers. The Universal soldiers in the movie are supposed to be reanimated American military personnel who died fighting for the United States in Vietnam, but the actors who portrayed these patriotic warriors actually represented a completely international cast from 3 different European countries. Jean-Claude Van Damme, who plays the lead character Luc Devereaux, was born and raised in Belgium before making his way to Hollywood to pursue his martial arts and acting career. His distinctive accent and European background were so well known that the script had to be specifically rewritten to explain why his character spoke with such a thick, non-American accent, giving Devereaux French ancestry to account for Van Damme's natural speaking patterns. Dolph Lundgren, who portrays the psychotic Sergeant Andrew Scott, hails from Sweden, where he was born and educated before becoming an action movie star. Lundgren actually holds a master's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Sydney and was a Fulbright scholar, making him one of the most academically accomplished actors ever to play an American soldier in an action movie. Ralph Moeller, who appears as the intimidating Unisol-designated GR-76, was born in Germany and had already established himself as a successful bodybuilder and actor in European productions before joining the Universal Soldier cast. Moeller's massive physical presence and imposing stature made him perfect for playing one of the enhanced super soldiers, even though he was portraying yet another supposedly American military veteran. This casting situation created an amusing irony where a movie about American soldiers fighting for their country and then being resurrected to serve America's interests was actually performed by actors who represented Belgium, Sweden, and Germany. The international nature of the casting reflected the global appeal of action movies during the early 1990s, when European martial artists and bodybuilders were becoming major stars in Hollywood productions. The fact that these 3 European actors could convincingly portray American soldiers demonstrates both their acting abilities and the universal nature of military characters in action films, where physical presence and combat skills often matter more than authentic regional accents or cultural backgrounds. Fact 11. Van Damme's accent written in. The writers of Universal Soldier faced a unique challenge when Jean-Claude Van Damme was cast as the lead character because his unmistakably thick Belgian accent didn't match the American soldier they had originally envisioned for the role of Luc Devereaux. Van Damme's distinctive way of speaking English had already become one of his trademark characteristics in previous action movies, but it created an obvious problem for a story about American military personnel who were supposed to have grown up in the United States. The original script didn't account for any foreign-born soldiers in the Universal Soldier program, which meant that Van Damme's accent would have been a glaring inconsistency that could have pulled audiences out of the story. Rather than asking Van Damme to attempt an American accent, which might have sounded forced or unconvincing, the screenwriters decided to take a different approach by modifying the character's background to accommodate the actor's natural speech patterns. They rewrote portions of the script to establish that Luc Devereaux came from a French-American family with strong cultural ties to his European heritage. This backstory modification gave the character a logical reason for speaking with a non-American accent while still maintaining his status as a legitimate United States Army soldier who could have served in Vietnam. The French ancestry explanation allowed Van Damme to use his natural speaking voice without creating any plot holes or confusion about the character's identity and military service. The script changes also included references to Devereaux's last name and family history that reinforced his French background, making the accent feel like an integral part of the character rather than an awkward oversight by the casting department. This approach demonstrated how smart screenwriting can turn potential problems into character assets by finding creative ways to incorporate actors' real-world characteristics into fictional roles. The solution worked so well that many viewers probably never questioned why an American soldier would speak the way Van Damme does, because the French ancestry explanation provided a perfectly reasonable justification that fit naturally into the story without drawing unnecessary attention to itself or disrupting the film's overall narrative flow. Fact 12. Gractor 44 Moon 44 Tribute. The seemingly random alphanumeric designation GR44 that identifies Jean-Claude Van Damme's character in the Universal Soldier program actually contains a hidden tribute to director Roland Emmerich's the previous film in the project, where he first began his creative partnership with screenwriter Dean Devlin. In Universal Soldier, each of the reanimated soldiers receives a specific code name that appears to be just a standard military identification system, with Van Damme's Luke Devereaux being designated as GR-44, while other soldiers get different letter and number combinations. To most viewers, these designations probably seem like typical military bureaucracy with no particular significance, beyond keeping track of the various enhanced soldiers in the program. However, the 44 portion of Van Damme's character code was deliberately chosen by Emmerich as a personal reference to his 1990 science fiction film Moon 44, which had been his previous directorial project before taking on Universal Soldier. Moon 44 was a low-budget space thriller that Emmerich had made in Germany, and while it wasn't a major commercial success, it represented an important stepping stone in his career as he worked toward breaking into Hollywood filmmaking. More significantly, Moon 44 was where Roland Emmerich first met Dean Devlin, who would become his long-term writing and producing partner for many future projects. Their collaboration on Universal Soldier marked the beginning of a creative relationship that would eventually produce some of the biggest blockbuster films of the 1990s, including Stargate, Independence Day, and Godzilla. By incorporating the number 44 into Van Damme's character designation, Emmerich was quietly acknowledging the film that had brought him together with Devlin and set the stage for their successful partnership. This kind of subtle personal reference demonstrates how filmmakers often include small details that have special meaning to them, even when those references are likely to go unnoticed by general audiences who wouldn't be familiar with the director's previous work or career history. The tribute shows Emmerich's appreciation for the project that launched his Hollywood career and introduced him to his most important creative collaborator. Fact 13. Built to destroy motel set. The Lucky Motor Court motel that gets completely demolished during one of Universal Soldier's most intense action sequences wasn't an actual operating business that the production rented and then repaired, but rather a specially constructed set that was built from the ground up with the specific purpose of being destroyed on camera. One of the movie's most memorable scenes involves a massive shootout and chase sequence that takes place at this roadside motel, where Van Damme's character and the reporter are hiding out when they get discovered by the other Universal soldiers. The scene features extensive gunfire that tears through walls, vehicles crashing through buildings, and explosions that leave the entire motel complex in ruins by the time the action moves on to other locations. Creating this level of destruction would have been extremely expensive and logistically complicated if the filmmakers had tried to use a real motel, because they would have needed to find a business owner willing to let them completely wreck the property, then either pay for extensive repairs or compensate for the total loss of the building. Additionally, real motels are built for durability and safety rather than spectacular destruction, which could have made the demolition effects look less dramatic or required dangerous amounts of explosives to achieve the desired visual impact. Instead, the production team decided to construct the Lucky Motor Court as a purpose-built movie set that was specifically engineered to be shot up, crashed through, and blown apart in the most visually exciting ways possible. The walls, doors, windows, and structural elements were all designed to break apart cleanly and safely when hit by gunfire or vehicles, while still looking completely realistic to movie cameras. This approach gave the filmmakers complete control over every aspect of the destruction, allowing them to plan exactly how each wall would collapse, where each explosion would occur, and how the vehicles would crash through the buildings. The set was built with special materials and techniques that would create maximum visual spectacle, while keeping the cast and crew safe during the elaborate action sequence filming. Fact 14. Twisted original ending. The original ending of Universal Soldier was dramatically different from what audiences eventually saw in theaters, featuring a much darker and more cynical conclusion that would have completely changed the emotional impact of the entire story. In the version that made it to theaters, Luke Devereaux successfully defeats Andrew Scott and is reunited with his real parents at their family farm in Louisiana, providing a hopeful and heartwarming resolution where the reanimated soldier gets to reconnect with his past and find some measure of peace after his traumatic experiences. This ending gives audiences a sense of closure and suggests that Devereaux has successfully reclaimed his humanity and identity. However, the original script contained a shocking twist that would have revealed this happy reunion to be nothing more than an elaborate deception orchestrated by the very people Devereaux thought he could trust. In this alternate version, the elderly couple who appeared to be Luke's loving parents were actually imposters, who had been planted by Dr. P. Christopher Gregor, the scientist character played by Jerry Orbach. The dark revelation would have shown that Gregor, who seemed to be a helpful ally providing information about the Universal Soldier program, was actually the main villain who had been manipulating Devereaux from the very beginning. Rather than being a concerned scientist trying to help expose the program's problems, Gregor would have been revealed as the mastermind behind the entire scheme, using fake parents as bait to lure Devereaux into a trap. This twisted ending would have meant that Devereaux's emotional journey toward rediscovering his humanity and reconnecting with his family was all based on lies, with even his most precious memories and relationships being nothing more than carefully constructed illusions designed to control him. When the studio tested this darker conclusion with preview audiences, the reaction was overwhelmingly negative. Test viewers hated the cynical twist ending and felt cheated by the revelation that Devereaux's family reunion was fake, leading the filmmakers to shoot the more optimistic ending that appears in the final cut of the movie. Fact 15. Influenced real military weapons. Universal Soldier's futuristic weapon designs didn't just look cool on screen, but actually influenced real-world military development, as the film's high-tech handgun configurations helped inspire the United States Special Operations Command to develop similar weapon systems for actual combat use. The Universal Soldiers in the movie are equipped with sophisticated handguns that feature advanced accessories like laser aiming modules and sound suppressors, creating a futuristic military aesthetic that emphasized the enhanced soldiers' technological superiority over conventional forces. These weapons were designed to look cutting-edge and militaristic, fitting perfectly with the film's science fiction premise of genetically enhanced super soldiers using advanced equipment. What makes this particularly interesting is that the U.S. Special Operations Command had already initiated something called the Offensive Handgun Weapon System concept in 1989, which was designed to acquire handguns for offensive military operations rather than just defensive purposes. However, when the right military personnel saw Universal Soldier and observed how effectively the film presented handguns equipped with laser sights and suppressors, they adopted some of these visual ideas for their own weapon development program. After extensive testing and development work, the military ultimately adopted the Heckler & Koch Mark 23 pistol in .45 caliber as their offensive handgun system. This weapon came equipped with a day, night, and infrared laser aiming module manufactured by Insight Technologies, designated as the AN/PEQ-6, along with a Knight's Armament suppressor attachment. The first of these movie-inspired weapons were delivered to Special Operations units in 1996, just 4 years after Universal Soldier introduced audiences to the concept of high-tech military handguns with similar accessories. However, the Mark 23 system proved to be quite heavy and unwieldy in practice, weighing about 5 pounds when fully loaded with all its attachments, which limited its frequent use by Special Operations Command forces. The military later developed a more practical version called the HK-45 Compact that incorporated similar technology in a more manageable package, and this weapon has been adopted by Naval Special Warfare Development Group, also known as SEAL Team 6, where it has seen actual combat action during the War on Terror.